I'm Jason, your moderator. We will, I'll let this go maybe like as much as 5 minutes long, depending on how the questions go. But we won't try to repeat previous time slot. Okay. We're here for coping with high prices, evaluating the response to rapidly increasing transportation fuel prices in small and rural communities. We have Dr. Greg Rowangould. Greg is the director of the Transportation Research Center and an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UVM. Specializes in modeling transportation systems, transportation policy evaluation, mobile source air quality analysis. Researches focuses on understanding how the design and operation of transportation systems and transportation policy affect the sustainability of communities, public health, and equity. I won't read the rest of this bio because it gets longer.
And also just copied it off the website, so you can.
But I am going to pass it over to Greg and have him introduce Narges, who was not on the bill, but you have the added bonus of hearing her present as well.
So thanks, Jason. Yeah, so I'm not actually presenting Narges. Narges, this would be the question. But Narges is a PhD student that's been working here at TRC for a few years now.
Almost
3?
Yeah.
We, when gas prices went up really high, it was 2022. We thought that was a good opportunity to try and understand how people might respond, and particularly in smaller and rural communities, because there's a perception that people who live in smaller and rural communities don't have, well, we know they're more auto-dependent, but they don't have a lot of options and therefore don't really respond to prices. They just either pay more or they'll just pay more. And the idea was to use this to also try to understand if we were to have some market-based policies, carbon taxes captured, whatever it might be, to understand how that would impact these communities too. So this thing that happened allowed us to get some insights on, can people change their travel behavior, or would they just keep traveling the same way they were because there's not much else you could do. So that, not to take too much of it, but that's what we're doing. And Narges helped put together this survey that we just quickly came up with when this happened, and has been evaluating the data and doing all that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thanks. Hi again. I'm so excited that I want to share the results of this project with you. So just a quick background introduction. There are several market-based policies that try to mitigate the greenhouse gas emission, like carbon tax and a cap and trade system. However, when it comes to implementing these policies in rural areas, there are some concerns that these policies may disproportionately impact the welfare of individuals living in these areas, given the fact that they are car dependent. And also, there's very little information about travel behavior in these areas and how people might respond to gas price and changes in price. So it makes it difficult to evaluate these concerns. So during the first half of 2022, there was an increase in fuel price, so we took advantage of that and distributed an online survey to see how actual people responded to this change in price in Vermont. And we distributed an online survey through Qualtrics from March until May. We got 911 initial responses, and after cleaning the data, we got 749 valid responses to do our analysis based on that. So I'm gonna walk you through the survey structure just to get familiar with the questions that we ask people. The survey has 5 main sections. The first one is introductory questions, which ask about the type of residence, where do you live, urban, rural, suburban, how often do you use each mode of transportation, number of vehicles, whether they have EV or not. The second section asks a series of statements, ask people to rate a series of statements about different topics like technology, environment, driving, politics, previous studies show that attitudes and belief play a major role when it comes to decision making, and since travel behavior, like how you choose to travel, is part of making a decision, we thought that it would be beneficial to add attitudes and belief in this section in the survey. The third section, we asked how the individual to say how they responded to fuel price for essential and less essential trips. And we also asked them how would they respond if fuel prices were to remain high for over a year. So we wanted to see whether there's a difference between like a temporary situation or like more like a permanent or long-term situation. We further ask additional questions about barriers to change to see what are the barriers to adopt an EV, what are the barriers to driving less, what keeps people from like adopting an EV, so that like we can somehow fix that. And the last section is about like a series of standard demographic questions. So I bring here like the example of statements that we ask individuals to rate. And there are like 30 different statements about different topics, as I mentioned. But we decided to convert all these 30 different statements into 4 different and distinct factors so that it would be easier for us to do the analysis. So we came up with like 4 different factors: environmental concern, technology concern, car travel enjoyment, and political activity. And each of the respondents has a score for each of these factors. So now I'm going to jump into the results section. So this plot shows the responses to the increase in fuel price for essential trips. Different colors show like different communities. At the very first look, we can see that a majority of respondents, regardless of the type of residence, try to drive more efficiently, the second row, combine their trips, third one, and make fewer shopping trips. At a very closer look, we can see that there are some differences between different communities. For example, a higher percentage of urban households use alternative mode of transportation, like biking, transit. To be more specific, 25% of urban households increase their trips by walking, which is 5 times greater than rural households. Also, a higher percentage of urban and suburban households decided to move. Not decided, but they already moved in response to gas price increase, which is higher than rural households. It's something that we should note that here, that these households, like the urban household, they're likely to move from rural areas. On the other hand, a higher percentage of rural and suburban households purchased or leased an electric vehicle. Although the percentage is like 5%, it's not that big, but the difference between urban and rural is very significant here, and it's important for us. So I just want to note that people had the opportunity to select multiple answers. So one might have selected, I purchased an electric vehicle and I also tried to drive more efficiently. And as you can see, there are like 15 different options to select. So we try to break down the responses and like came up with a fewer category. So we categorized the responses. We came up with 7 different categories: EV adoption, moving, mode substitution, activity substitution, reduce trip mileage, drive efficiently, and making like no changes. So for example, walking, biking, transit, using car share, they belong to mode substitution action cluster, and we call each of them an action cluster for that. And we classify each respondent into one of these action clusters based on the most aggressive action they reported taking. So again, for example, if someone mentioned that I purchased an electric vehicle and I also tried to drive more efficiently, we classify that respondent into the first action cluster, which is EV adoption. And based on that, we developed 4 statistical models to identify factors that they are associated with making actually choosing each of these action clusters. The reason that we use 4 is that we have like 2 trip purposes, essential and less essential trip, in 2 time frames, so the combination of all would be 4. And the variables that we use, socioeconomic variables, attitudinal factors, the community types, and we want to predict which of the action cluster people select or choose. So today I'm only going to show you the results from the essential trips. So the results show that, as I showed before in the plots, that rural households and suburban households are 4 and 8 times more likely to adopt an EV compared to urban households when gas price increase, and they're less likely to substitute their mode of transportation. Rural households are less likely to substitute their mode of transportation compared to urban households. Also, the attitudinal factors, they are statistically significant here, which indicates that concern about environment and being involved in politics are associated with making more, like any changes when gas price increase. On the other hand, those who enjoy car travel are less likely to make any changes to their travel when gas price increase. As I mentioned earlier, we further asked additional questions about barriers to change. So we asked individuals to rate how important would the following changes be to their decision to buy an electric vehicle instead of gasoline vehicle. So if costs reduce, how likely you are to buy an electric vehicle instead of gasoline vehicle for your next vehicle. More like charging station, faster charger, stuff like that. And we compare it across different communities. So we can see that respondents from all communities had a high level of concern for a range of factors related to EV adoption. And almost all of them, they are all important consideration for the respondents, like cost, faster charging, charger availability, truck and SUV. They're all important for EV adoption. We further ask how would the following changes in the community affect the amount that they drive. So by improving transportation, are you more likely to drive less? Or with closer public school, closer shopping location, more local employment opportunity. And we again compare it across different communities. Better public transportation and greater accessibility, which is closer shopping location and better transportation. They will appear to be the largest barriers to drive less. However, as we can see, the rest of the factors, they are not as important as these two, so they are unlikely to reduce their driving. So we find that people in suburban, rural, and urban areas of Vermont were able to respond to increasing gas price with different strategies, which suggests that market-based policies such as carbon tax might be effective, have the potential to be effective in these areas, and influencing the travel behavior, even though that rural areas are car-dependent households living in there. Attitudes and beliefs, they have a significant role in the choices people make when gas price increases, and it seems that they are as important as land use and socioeconomic factors. Greater accessibility and more transit options were noted as a barriers to change, so it seems that there is a potential that we can create more compact and mixed-use development within small and rural communities, so that people have option to use transit or on-demand transit solution that can be a feasible solution in rural areas. And this research was funded by National Center for Sustainable Transportation and supported by the U.S. Department of Transportation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
was the responses that you showed, including like the responses to gas price increases, their current and future responses combined? Could you ask both?
Yeah, so there were like separate questions. The first one was that how did you respond to the current increase, like the one that are happening now? And the next question was that how would you respond if the fuel price were to remain high for over a year? But right now what I show here was only for the current increase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will add in, just we're here and we have time, that one thing we really tried to focus on, in which we went quickly through this, is really the differences in the response between urban, suburban, rural. And I think what we found, which was that there's not that much difference. Now, of course, like Burlington's not the largest urban area in this country. So we don't have as much variety maybe as if we included other states with bigger cities and stuff. But that, I think, was one of the things that was most interesting and less expected. I mean, our hypothesis that people do respond to prices everywhere, and not just by like, we're not going to substitute like food for driving, but that people can change their travel behavior too. But I was surprised in how similar most of what people did. There were the obvious things, like people were going to walk more in urban areas and maybe buy EVs in more rural areas. But the barriers to EV adoption, the barriers to being able to drive even less, even if you don't drive as much if you live in an urban area, were all very similar across a range of communities, which I thought was sort of interesting and is sort of a counterpoint to the common perception that in suburban and rural areas, people won't respond to prices. They have to drive just the way they're always driving, but that's just not necessarily true. I think that would be a main takeaway. It's a small study, and as Vermont was opportunistic, so we had some funding and we had to do this app. But ideally, you could do something with a more variety of
Could you just extrapolate a little bit on the third point there, noting that lack of transit options were noted as a barrier to change? Were you able to glean it all from the study that if those barriers were to be removed, how willing respondents would be to utilize more transit options or other forms of transportation outside of a single occupancy vehicle?
Yeah, so here we ask people that if we improve like different options like transit, here the second one is public transportation connects to more places you go. And we ask them if we improve it, how likely you are to drive less. So as you can see, like a small decrease in driving, a moderate decrease in driving, and like a great percentage of people living in different communities indicated that like having better transit would somehow help them to drive less. So we are thinking that if like we have like a more, and also greater accessibility here. So like by having a compact and also compact area with a more transit, on-demand transit, we can encourage people to drive less and using more transit, even like in rural areas, like by having small communities, compact communities. So does that
Add
answer your
something,
question?
I think. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think like those who said moderately decrease, I don't think most of them would switch to transit if it's provided. It's like, I mean, it's my perspective. Like you could say, yeah, we want better transit, but for others to use transit and we can like drive.
Well,
No.
So there's a couple things, and this gets into maybe a limitation of trying to do a study like this. And the quick one is that, right? We asked people. Well, first of all, this section. So the first part of the study, what may not be readily apparent, but it was kind of unique is that we were able to observe by asking what you did, what people actually did, which gets at your comment, which is what people say they'll do and what they do are totally different. Both of them. But we got to see how people, right, the price at that point in time, $5 for gas seemed like astronomical. Now it's like, oh, it's a little higher than it was last week. And so people just had to tell us, what are you doing now? What's different? And that was on everyone's mind because that was like what was going on in Vermont those few weeks. And now we move into the hypotheticals about, right, okay, so like you didn't start doing all these other things. Why? Well, that's a hypothetical. And so it becomes a lot trickier. Even more difficult was what is a small, moderate, or large decrease is going to be different from person to person and community to community. But in this type of research and survey type instrument, we don't have the time, space, and really the money to have people tell us about how far do you normally drive, you know, where are things, and how many miles less would you drive, which is what we really love to know. But that type of work, that's a multi-million-dollar type of research study too. You have to call people and have them have a walk of where they travel. And this was kind of a quick and dirty thing. So that's another limitation in that, you know, these are hypothetical questions, and they give us to be easy to answer and give us some indication. We were largely interested in the differences between categories rather than, you know, being able to say people, we give them transit, that they'll drive 20% less.
Who's first?
Yeah.
You're first.
I think it's like really interesting that you guys found that regardless of community status that everyone exhibited travel behavior change. But I noticed like not all of those behaviors are equal. So like urban would include more walking, whereas rural is like purchasing a vehicle. So I was wondering if like with the socioeconomic demographic information that you collected, like was there any discrepancy between like, oh, rural communities would end up paying more for, say, gas increase or carbon tax, not because they're paying more for gas, but because they have to make more expensive investments in order to change their behaviors. If that like makes sense, if that's something that like you could do with the data that you have.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
model, which we didn't go into detail because not sure everyone wants to look at the outcome of a regression model. But the idea that this is where I have there's a bunch of socioeconomic factors in there. And there aren't a lot of things that those factors didn't explain a lot of the differences or weren't specifically significant in the types of decisions people made when we controlled for that. But we haven't disaggregated to the level of like a lower income rural community, how did that group respond? So there's still a lot that we can look at.
It's one thing to want to switch to an EV and another thing to be able to switch to an EV.
Yeah. And another thing to note in Vermont, which is interesting too, is that Burlington is one of the lowest income areas in the state in many respects. And many rural areas are quite wealthy. And there are rural areas that are very not wealthy as well too, which is a unique thing in Vermont, is that there's a perception that Burlington is, you know, this. It is also where a lot of wealth is generated, but it's also very.
Actually, Winsky is the lowest one.
Yeah. So that's.
I came in a little late, so you may have already answered this question, but did your study ask people the purposes for their travel, or was it just examining overall car usage for like all transportation needs?
Yeah, we consider like different purposes when we ask them, how did you respond? So we asked them, how did you respond to the gas price increase for your essential trips, like going to work, going to school? And then the same question for their less essential trips as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is because I sometimes suspect that maybe if we're trying to apply the public transit as like a tool for reducing car trips in Vermont, that maybe we're focusing a little bit too much on commuting, which is very difficult for a lot of people to use public transit to do, but there might be more opportunity for pleasure. You know, like I think about ski trips, you know, we often see GMT like upping their certain, or yeah, they have seasonal routes just going to ski mountains and stuff like that. You know, we have such a college and education-based economy in certain parts of the state. I think there's a lot of opportunity for fixed route transit to serve particular needs like that may be, in the academic language, thought of as like discretionary or recreational or something like that, but still perform an important function in the overall state's economy.
One thing on the transit thing too, we saw it here, but there's a bunch of, we've been doing other survey work and other students in the group, and we hear so often the desire for transit in rural places where it's in many ways not really feasible, or certainly not cost effective. And we have another housing study that Jason's reviewing that we've done looking at where people live and where they want to live in that type of mismatch. And it's becoming, I think we're starting to see a picture, like people want to live in a town center or an urban center. And a town center in Vermont could be, you know, a very small, compact thing. And people want transit. And so, I mean, there seems to be a desire for these things. We saw it here, like it was transit and people want to be closer to retail shopping. People want to be next to these things, but it's not where most people are living in. We found more than 50% of people live somewhere they don't want to live, by community type, not by like, I don't like my house particularly. And so it's a big mismatch, and we don't have the right housing supply in the right place. And what's the real opportunity is that people seem to want to live in transit efficient places, and if we could get them living there, we could probably provide much higher quality transit for much less. But that is why everyone's talking about how to deal with the housing and the land use. But it's not, I don't think it's not for lack of people move to Vermont and want to live by themselves in the woods. There are some people that want to do that, but many people seem to actually want to live in some of these places.
Any other questions out there?
I didn't catch it. If you said it, I'm sorry. What is the sample size roughly of this survey?
749 responses.
Roughly.
Exactly.
That's good.
Yeah.
911 initial responses, but after cleaning, like the one that we used for the modeling was 749.
And this is the one where we use random email addresses. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the bolded ones are the ones that have significant statistical differences?
So
Yeah.
The
asterisk
bolded
ones.
lines.
The bolded ones go with the text, but
yeah, the bolded ones are the one that I wanted to talk about.
I see.
But the one that has star, they are that one that are significant. Yeah, the star one.
we have a manuscript, a paper that's being reviewed.
I see.
You can request a copy.
I'll ask maybe one last question. What is that transit line that does have, there's a couple of data points that look to be significant?
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
So we use like how often like they use different mode of transportation as a variable to see that if someone using like transit more often, how do they respond to gas price increase as well. So what was like the story is that those who were using transit or walking or biking, they actually kept going the same. They're like using more like transit more often than gas price increase. Yeah, or like combining their trips, something like that.
So like you see all the stars on the two transit lines, so it would be like those who often use transit are less likely to drive more efficiently or adopt the EV, which right because they use transit.
It's basically zero. It's like
Yeah.
there's
Well,
no
so
chance.
that's why we didn't bold it because it's like an
Yeah.
obvious. Of course you
Yeah.
don't because that's, yeah.
So they
the
behave
reality
actually in the same way, like using transit. I think that's because they have like no other option.
I think I can see like gas price like for reduced mileage trip you have 11.2, but for like EV adoption you have 5. So it's more likely for them to like reduce mileage than
What?
my EV.
What? Where?
It's up above environment concern. It's great.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, gas
So,
price.
yeah, this one is that how important is the gas price for
Okay.
that? So if someone is like very, which they are all significant statistically and they are like very high, which makes sense because if
Yeah.
you are like, if gas price is so important for you, you're definitely gonna change your travel behavior.
But it says that you're more likely to move instead of buying an EV. Like it's 22.6 for moving. Or,
You have to be careful on how you.
yeah. But
Not assessment.
yeah,
So these are odds ratios, and so
Oh,
that's the increased odds of choosing one of those top line
Oh, yeah.
options. But the baseline odds of choosing any of those vary across the categories. So, like the
It's not at all important. The base of this is
Yeah.
not at all important. So those who said that gas price is very important
Compared to-
for them
oh, yeah,
is
yeah,
22
yeah.
times more likely to. Yeah.
I mean, I wonder what the correlation between that and political activity. I don't know how you define kind of political activity or political sort of identification on that, but if there was somebody who was saying that gas prices were very important, and I'm just, again, I might be interpreting this data wrong, but if gases are somewhat important, but the EV adoption is not that high, then
Was there something more than the gas prices that are preventing the change?
or is there a correlation between their assessment or opinion of EV adoption in general versus the high gas price? And the high gas price might be a complaint of the political or the economic situation versus the and then their opinion about EV adoption in general, or as a climate strategy, or their assessment of the climate situation in general.
I just want to clear that this political activity, this variable came from like a series of statements that we asked respondents to rate. So we did the factor analysis. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Basically, you are combining several factors, like several different variables, into a factor instead of using all of them in the model. So this political activity came from that, and yeah.
Yeah, and the questions come from a standard panel of these type of attitudinal factors from other studies on this. And so it's political activities like, do you attend public meetings? Do you vote? Things like that. Are you in touch? Not like you're a politician.
Or ideological spectrum or anything like that.
And I have conducted a local government official.
Yeah, so it's
These
not
are-
partisan type.
Okay.
Yeah.
if you're involved.
Yeah, and so like with the EV, you saw the gas price didn't seem to be a factor in choosing an EV. It was, do you care about the environmental concern seems to be was driving a big part of the EV adoption, and less so of the change in gas price and some of the other things. Okay. It's 750 responses. The R-square value, if you're noticing, was about 0.2, it was like 0.18. So
Yeah.
80% of the variation in responses is explained by other stuff, not right in the model, which is common of behavioral models, because modeling human behaviors isn't like predicting when a steel beam breaks or something, or when our colleagues do.
All right, I agree with that. Great questions, good discussion all around. Thank you so much, everybody. Maybe one last round of applause.